Meetings with Remarkable Men, Chapter 6. Abram Yelov. After Pogosian, Abram Yelov was the next of those remarkable people whom I happened to meet during my preparatory age, and who, voluntarily and involuntarily, served as vivifying factors for the complete formation of one or another aspect of my individuality. I first met him a short time after I had lost all hope of discovering from contemporary people anything real concerning those questions in which I was wholly absorbed, and when, on returning from Echmiadzin to Tiflis, I buried myself in the reading of ancient literature. I returned to Tiflis chiefly because I could obtain there any book I wanted. In this city, both then and the last time I stopped there, it was very easy to find any rare book in any language, especially in Armenian, Georgian, and Arabic. When I arrived in Tiflis, I went to live in the district called Didube, and from there I used to go nearly every day to the Soldiers' Bazaar, to one of the streets along the west side of the Alexander Gardens, where most of the shops of the Tiflis booksellers were situated. On this same street, in front of the permanent bookstores, small traders and book peddlers used to spread out their books and pictures on the ground, especially on market days. Among these small traders was a certain young eyesore who bought and sold or handled on commission all kinds of books. This was Abram Yelov, as he was called in his youth, an artful dodger if ever there was one, but for me an irreplaceable friend. He was even then a walking catalogue, for he knew innumerable titles of books in almost all languages, the names of the authors, and also the date and place of publication of any book, and where it could be obtained. In the beginning I bought books from him, and later I exchanged or returned those I had already read, and he used to help me find whatever other books I needed. We soon became friends. At that time Abram Yelov was preparing himself to enter the cadet school, and spent almost all his free time cramming for this. But nevertheless, being much attracted to philosophy, he also managed to read a great many books on this subject. It was owing to his interest in philosophical questions that our close friendship began, and we often used to meet in the evening in the Alexander Gardens or in the Mushtite and discuss philosophical themes. We often rummaged together through stacks of old books, and I even began helping him on market days in his trading. Our friendship was further strengthened by the following occurrence. On market days, there was a certain Greek who used to set his stall next to where Yelov traded. This Greek traded in various plaster of Paris wares, such as statuettes, busts of famous people, figures of Cupid and Psyche, a shepherd and shepherdess, and all kinds of money boxes of all sizes, in the forms of cats, dogs, pigs, apples, pears, and so forth. In short, in all the rubbish with which it was at one time fashionable to decorate tables, chests of drawers, and special whatnots. One day, during a lull in the trading, Yelov nodded in the direction of these wares, and, in his singular way of expressing himself, said, "There's someone making a pile of money, whoever it is that's making that junk. They say it's some dirty Italian, a newcomer that makes the trash in his dirty hovel, and those idiots, hawkers, like that Greek, stuff his pockets full of money laboriously earned by the fools who buy these horrors to decorate their idiotic homes. And here we stick all day on one spot, suffering in the cold, so that in the evening we can choke ourselves on a piece of stale maize bread, to just barely keep body and soul together. And the next morning we come here again and go through the same cursed grind." Soon after this, I went up to the Greek hawker, and learned from him that these wares were indeed made by an Italian, who guarded the secrets of his manufacture in every possible way. And 12 of us hawkers," added the Greek, "are hardly enough to sell these wares all over Tiflis." His story and Yelov's indignation stirred me up, and then and there I thought of trying to steal a march on this Italian, the more so since at that time I had to consider beginning some business or other of earning, as money was already going like the exodus of the Israelites. I first of all spoke with the Greek hawker, of course intentionally arousing his feelings of patriotism. Then, having composed in my mind a plan of action, I went with him to the Italian and asked for work. To my good fortune it turned out that just previously a boy who had been working with him had been discharged for stealing tools, and the Italian needed someone to pour the water for him during the stirring of the plaster. As I was willing to work for any pay, I was immediately taken on. According to my plan, I pretended from the very first day to be a blockhead. I worked very hard, almost as much as 3 men, but in other respects behaved stupidly. For this, the Italian very soon even took a liking to me and no longer hid his secrets from this young fellow who was so foolish and harmless, as carefully as he did from others. In 2 weeks, I already knew how many of the things were made. My employer would call me to hold the glue, to stir the mixture, and so on, and I thus penetrated to his holy of holies and soon learned all the little but, in this work, very important secrets. And in this sort of work they are indeed very important. For example, when the plaster is dissolved, one must know how many drops of lemon juice should be added so that the plaster will not have bubbles, and the articles will come out smooth. Otherwise the fine extremities of the statuettes, such as the nose, ear, and so on, may have ugly hollows. It is also important to know the right proportions of glue, gelatine, and glycerin for making the molds. A little more or a little less of anything, and everything goes wrong. Knowing only the procedures without these secrets would not enable one to obtain good results. In a word, a month and a half later, there appeared on the market similar wares of my making. To the forms which the Italian had, I added several comic heads, which were filled with small shot, and served as pen holders. I also put up for sale special money boxes, which sold in great numbers, and were christened by me the invalid in bed. I do not think there was a single house in Tiflis at that time that did not have one of my money boxes. Later I had several workmen working for me and 6 Georgian girls as apprentices. Yelov, with great delight, helped me in everything, and even stopped trading in books on weekdays. At the same time, Yelov and I continued our own work, the reading of books and the study of philosophical questions. After several months, when I had amassed a fair sum of money and was growing weary of my workshop, I sold it, while it was in full swing, to 2 Jews for a good price. As I had to vacate my rooms, which were connected to the workshop, I moved to Molokhan Street near the railway station, and Yelov, with his books, moved over there also. Yelov was short, thick-set, and dark, with eyes always burning like 2 live coals. He was very hairy, with shaggy eyebrows and a beard growing nearly from the nose itself and almost covering his cheeks, the ruddiness of which nevertheless always shone through. He was born in Turkey, in the region of Van, either in the town of Bitlis itself or its environs, and from there his family, 4 or 5 years before we met, had moved to Russia. When they arrived in Tiflis, he was sent to the first gymnasium, as it was called, but soon, in spite of the fact that the customs there were very simple and unceremonious, Yelov, for some prank or mischief, made himself unbearable even for this institution, and was expelled by order of the teachers' council. A short time afterwards his father turned him out, and from then on he began to live as the spirit moved him. In short, as he himself expressed it, he was the black sheep of his family. His mother, however, unknown to his father, often sent him money. Yelov cherished very tender feelings for his mother, which manifested themselves even in little things. For instance, he always had a photograph of his mother hanging over his bed, and never went out without kissing this photograph. And when he returned, he would always call from the doorway, "Good day, mother," or "Good evening, mother." It now seems to me that I grew to like him all the more for this feature. His father he also loved, but in his own way, and he considered him a petty, vain, and willful man. His father was a contractor and was considered very rich. Among the Izors, moreover, he was very important, apparently because he was a descendant, though only through the female line, of the family of Marshamun, to which formerly the Izor kings belonged, and from which, ever since the end of the kingdom, the patriarchs have come. Abram also had a brother, who was then studying in America, in Philadelphia, I believe. But his brother he did not like at all, holding the firm opinion that he was a double-faced egoist and an animal without a heart. Yelov had many peculiarities. Among others, he had the habit of always hitching up his trousers, and later it cost us, his comrades, many and persistent labors to break him of this habit. Pogosyan often poked fun at him for it, saying, "Ha! And you wanted to be an officer. At the very first meeting with a general, if you'd go, you poor fool, to the guard-house, for instead of saluting you'd hitch up your trousers," and so on. Pogosyan expressed himself still less delicately. Pogosyan and Yelov were forever teasing each other, and even when talking amicably, Yelov would never call Pogosyan anything else but salted Armenian, and Pogosyan would call Yelov Kachakoch. The Armenians in general are called salted Armenians, and the Izors Kachakochs. Kachakoch means literally stealer of crosses. It seems that this nickname originated as follows. The Izors are known to be cunning rogues. In Transcaucasia there even exists the following definition of them. Boil together 7 Russians, you get 1 Jew. Boil 7 Jews, you get 1 Armenian. But only by boiling 7 Armenians can you get 1 Izor. Among the Izors scattered everywhere were many priests, the majority of whom, moreover, were self-ordained, which was then easily done. Living in the environs of Mount Ararat, which marked the boundary of 3 countries, Russia, Turkey, and Persia, and having an almost free right of passage across all the frontiers, they gave themselves out in Russia as Turkish Izors, in Persia as Russian Izors, and so on. They not only performed the church ceremonies, but traded with great success among the religious and ignorant people in all kinds of so-called holy relics. In the depths of Russia, for instance, giving themselves out as Greek priests, in whom the Russians had great faith, they did a good business by selling things purporting to have been brought from Jerusalem, from holy Athos, and from other holy places. Among these relics were fragments of the true cross on which Christ was crucified, hair of the Virgin Mary, fingernails of St. Nicholas of Myra, the tooth of Judas, which brings good luck, a piece of the horseshoe of the horse of St. George, and even the rib or skull of some great saint. These things were bought with great reverence by naive Christians, especially those of the Russian merchant class, and many were the relics of Izor priest manufacture in the houses and innumerable churches of Holy Russia. Because of this, the Armenians, well knowing this brotherhood, nicknamed them and still now call them stealers of crosses. As for the Armenians, on the other hand, they are called salted because they have the custom of salting a child at his birth. I must add, by the way, that in my opinion this custom is not without its use. My special observations have shown me that the newborn children of other races suffer from a skin rash in the places where one usually applies some kind of powder to prevent inflammation. But with rare exceptions, Armenian children born in the same regions do not suffer from this rash, although they have all the other children's diseases. This fact I ascribe to the custom of salting. Yelov was unlike his compatriots in his complete lack of one characteristic that is very typical of the Izors. Although he was very hot-tempered, he never bore a grudge. His anger passed quickly, and if he happened to offend anyone, as soon as his temper cooled, he tried his best to smooth over whatever he had said. He was scrupulously considerate about the religion of others. Once in the course of a conversation about the intensive propaganda which was being carried on among the Izors by missionaries of almost all European countries, in order to convert them to their respective faiths, he said, "It is not a question of to whom a man prays, but a question of his faith. Faith is conscience, the foundation of which is laid in childhood. If a man changes his religion, he loses his conscience, and conscience is the most valuable thing in a man. I respect his conscience, and since his conscience is sustained by his faith, and his faith by his religion, therefore I respect his religion, and for me it would be a great sin if I should begin to judge his religion, or to disillusion him about it, and thus destroy his conscience, which can only be acquired in childhood." When he expressed himself in this way, Pogosyan would ask him, "And why did you wish to be an officer?" Then the cheeks of Abram would flame, and he would vehemently cry, "Go to the devil, you salted falanga!" Yelov was unusually devoted to his friends. He was ready, as is said, to give his soul for anyone to whom he became attached. When Yelov and Pogosyan became friends, they were so attached to one another as may God grant all brothers to be. But the external manifestation of the friendship of these two was quite particular and difficult to explain. The more they loved each other, the ruder they were to each other. But under this rudeness was hidden such a tender love that anyone who saw it could not fail to be touched by the depths of his heart. Several times I, who knew what was beneath some rudeness or other, was so moved that I could not hold back the tears which involuntarily came to my eyes. For instance, a scene such as the following would occur. Yelov would happen to be a guest in some house where he was offered candy. According to convention, he would be obliged to eat it, so as not to offend the person who offered it. However, even though very fond of candy, he would not eat it for anything in the world, but would hide it in his pocket to take to Pogosyan. And then he would not give it to him simply, but with every kind of mockery and volley of insults. He usually did so as follows. During conversation at dinner, he would, as if unexpectedly, find the candy in his pocket, and would offer it to Pogosyan, saying, "How the devil did this garbage happen to be in my pocket? Here, gobble up this muck. You're an expert in swallowing everything that's no good to anyone else." Pogosyan would take it, also scolding, "Such a delicacy is not for a snout like yours. You can only gorge yourself on acorns like your brothers, the pigs." And while Pogosyan was eating the candy, Yelov, with a disdainful expression, would say, "Look how he's gobbling that sweet stuff, how he relishes it, like a Karabakh ass munching thistles. Now, after this, he'll be running after me like a little dog merely because I gave him this loathsome rubbish." And the talk would continue in this fashion. Besides being a phenomenon in the knowledge of books and authors, Yelov later on became a phenomenon in the knowledge of languages. I, who then spoke 18 languages, felt a greenhorn in comparison with him.
Before I knew a single word of any European language, he already spoke almost all of them, so perfectly that it was hard to tell that the language he was speaking was not his own. For example, the following incident occurred. Skridlov, the professor of archaeology about whom we will speak later, had to take a certain Afghan holy relic across the river Amu Darya. But to do this was impossible, since a close watch was kept on all persons crossing the Russian border in either direction, both by the Afghan guards and by the British soldiers, who, for some reason or other, were there at that time in great numbers.
Having obtained somewhere the old uniform of a British officer, Yelov put it on, went over to the post where the British troops were stationed, and passed himself off as a British officer from India, who had come there to hunt Turkestan tigers. He was able to distract their attention so well with his English stories that we had time, without hurrying and without being observed by the British troops, to take what we wanted from one bank to the other. Yelov, in addition to everything else he did, continued to study intensively. He did not, as he had intended, enter the cadet school, but went to Moscow, where he brilliantly passed the examination for the Lazarev Institute, and several years later received a degree in philology at the Kazan University, if I remember rightly. Just as Pogosyan had a peculiar notion about physical work, so Yelov had a very original view about mental work. He once said, "It's all the same. Our thoughts work day and night. Instead of allowing them to think about caps of invisibility or the riches of Aladdin, rather let them be occupied with something useful. In giving direction to thought, of course a certain amount of energy is spent, but no more is needed for this purpose in a whole day than for the digestion of one meal. I therefore decided to study languages, not only to prevent my thoughts from idling, but also not to allow them to hinder my other functions with their idiotic dreams and childish fantasies. Besides, the knowledge of languages can in itself sometimes be useful. This friend of my youth is still alive and well, and is now comfortably settled in one of the cities of North America. During the war he was in Russia, and lived most of the time in Moscow. He was caught by the Russian Revolution in Siberia, where he had gone to inspect one of his numerous book and stationery stores. During the Revolution he endured many hardships, and all his riches were swept from the face of the earth. Only 3 years ago his nephew, Dr. Yelov, came from America and persuaded him to emigrate there.